Thank you, Simon. Yes, my name is Stephen Graham. I work for NICVA, and before we had the current crisis, Simon and I were doing sessions around Northern Ireland looking at cybersecurity for small voluntary and community organisations. We thought that it would be really important actually to carry that work on, particularly now that we've got more people doing remote working. So we're delighted to have Simon along today again to do a session, do this webinar for us. Simon will run the webinar, and I think you'll be able to ask questions and that throughout the session, but I'll be stepping back and letting Simon crack on. I have a couple of thank yous to do. These sessions we have been doing and will probably continue to do, hopefully in the future, we're supported by the Halifax Foundation, so I want to give some thanks to those guys for supporting us to run these sessions, and obviously to Simon and his company Vertical Structure, and also the Northern Ireland Security Cluster for providing the platform today for us to run this session. So I'll stop now and hand back over to Simon. Thanks.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, Stephen. Sorry. Thank you very much, Stephen. As Stephen just said there, thanks also to NICVA for having us along to talk about this, and thanks to NICVA as well. I'll explain a little bit about us in a wee second, and vertical structure and all of those sort of bits and pieces. Just a little bit of housekeeping. You guys are all going to be kept on mute for the webinar. You should have a section in the go-to control panel which is called questions. If you have any questions as they come up, please feel free to put them in. We've got Sandra on our side and Stephen on our side who are looking at the questions, and we'll be able to pass them on to me as we go through. What we're going to try and do is to run through kind of some thoughts and ideas about what we're up to, and then after that we'll go through and do some questions after that, if that's okay. If there's anything hugely pertinent or really urgent, then we'll try and answer it immediately. But let's kick off. So first things first, I have to get my slideshow up and running, and then I have to share my screen. So show this one here. So my hope is that now everybody can see my slideshow, which is entitled Cybersecurity, the Community and Voluntary Sector. Unless I hear anything to the other way, to the alternative, I will say that is all working. So firstly, just want to tell you a little bit about us as an organisation, just to let you know who we are and why I'm speaking. I've been involved in cybersecurity now for many years. Since before it was actually called cybersecurity, it used to just be called security or doing it right or something like that. The reason I got into security is I was working for some organisations who were we were developing software for some oil and gas companies, and what we found was that security wasn't a thing in any way, shape or form. So what we did was we then started working with a Russian oil and gas firm, and the Russian oil and gas firm, their first question was, have you ever been security tested? Have you ever been penetration tested, as they call it? And we said no. And then they let loose a group of white hat hackers from St. Petersburg who tore our systems to pieces. For me, that was really a turning point, because I love cybersecurity now. I was able to watch these people destroying our systems and find out exactly what they were able to do, and it was brilliant, and I absolutely, kind of a changing point for me. I also have a great interest in the community and voluntary sector, and the charity sector as well. My wife actually works for a charity in Belfast. I see the amount of work that is required for things like funding forms, for Belfast City Council funding forms, in her case Arts Council funding forms. I understand that the sector is in a very poor state when it comes to funding, and that you have to spend a lot of your time writing funding requests, responding to questions, filling in forms, auditing, various other bits and pieces. So who has time for cybersecurity? Who has time for making sure that your stuff is safe? Well, unfortunately, the answer is that we have to do it all. And hopefully what I'm able to do is to give you some guidance and some tips on how to do these things safely. I'm going to bring up as well, while we're talking here, about the idea of protecting yourselves and your staff, especially while we're all working remotely. This is a strange new world that we're in, as you can see from the little bit above my head here. And the occasional cutouts. I'm not actually sitting in an office. I'm using a filter thing to block the very untidy room behind me. But I have, this is an environment that we have been in for many years, and now suddenly we're all pushed out of that environment and now working in a very strange new way. So let's go backwards. Let's think very briefly here. Let's go over some stuff. Think about, why is the sector being targeted? Well, UK charities, they hold a lot of information. In your information systems, you have a lot of data. You have a lot of, in some cases, funds, because what happens is, instead of receiving money on a monthly basis from work completed or anything like that, you can get funded annually. So you get a great big lump of, not a great big lump of money in many cases, probably not enough to run, but what you do have is you have a lump of money that comes in on an annual basis. And getting access to that money is the cyber criminals' goal. So it's a very good target, because you may have tens of thousands of pounds for the year, all stacked up, waiting to be spent and waiting to be stolen. And that's the key to these things here. You hold a lot of personal data, a lot of financial and commercial data, really interesting stuff in many cases, things that could be of great interest or monetary value even to a range of cyber criminals and other groups. Okay. So in Northern Ireland, we have a group called the NICVA. We call ourselves NICVA, of which Vertical Structure is a part. We have a great group of companies, approximately 35 companies, all from this part of the world. And our job is to look for opportunities for international and national collaboration, opportunities for business, and also to promote career opportunities. But we're also here to help people when they might have some problems, and we want to make sure that the community and voluntary sector are aware of these things. So here are some of our companies. Some of them you may have heard of, some of them you won't have done. Some of them are coming up with the latest cool tech at the moment, and maybe don't have you won't hear of them, but they'll be hugely successful in about 2 or 3 years' time. Some of them have been around for a long time. We're actually supported ourselves by Castle McDowell, the solicitors firm, and they are very great help to us in helping us to get our messages across. So as a cluster, we are here to help promote cybersecurity and to help organizations to understand what they're meant to be doing. So a little bit about me. I've already spoken about me, but it's my favorite topic, so I'll just tell you a little bit more. My role with many of my companies, many of my clients, is to help perform penetration security testing. And what does that mean? Well, it means we look at your stuff and we try and break into it. So we look at your office and we think, well, how would we break into that and steal all the data if we wanted to? What about Office 365? What about AWS? What about your Google Mail? How could we break into that and therefore help you, protect you from the cyber criminals? I also do security consultancy and helping organizations improve their processes and procedures. So I'm helping understand security all the way through. And one of the things that I think is really important to get across here is that a charity or a group like yourselves, they're very similar, in fact identical to small businesses. And when we look at the sector guide later on that the NCSC, the National Cybersecurity Centre, have offered, it's exactly the same. It's just they've changed the word small business to charity guide. That's it. Okay. So what I'm going to do before we begin in earnest, I am going to launch a poll here. Okay, so you should see this poll appearing on your screen. It'll take over everything. It'll take over hopefully your current screen. And the poll is, how prepared were you for the current COVID-19 crisis? I'd like to select one of the following. Okay, so very prepared, business as usual; moderately prepared, we're muddling through; and not prepared at all, we're struggling. So if you'd like to select one of those for me, that would be absolutely brilliant. Okay, so we've nearly got everybody now. We'll wait for one more, and then I'm going to close the poll. Any more for any more? I would do the countdown clock now. No. Okay. That's our lot. Let's have a look at the results. So how prepared were we for the current crisis? The three answers that we had there. So Kerry and Sarah, looks like, apologies, you had some kind of issue there. That's no problem. I will presume that you will be one of the two that we're seeing here, the green and the purple. I.e., moderately prepared, we're muddling through, or not prepared at all, we're struggling. Okay, that tends to be what we're seeing here. 83% moderately prepared, we're muddling through. That seems to be the way of the world at the moment, doesn't it? We're all muddling through. I don't know about yourselves, but I'm muddling through as a parent and as an employer and as a worker, as everything. And it seems to be that we're getting there, but we're maybe not all we're maybe not there just yet. So that's really interesting. Thank you very much for sharing those thoughts. Moderately prepared is better than not prepared at all. Okay, so let's have a think about why we're being targeted. Okay, why is the sector being targeted? Well, you're subject to the same vulnerabilities as other organizations and businesses that conduct financial transactions. You have electronically held data, you have electronically held systems, but what do you not have? Well, in many cases, you don't have the funds to be able to secure it. I would ask the question, and maybe we set up another poll for later on. If you were who is the IT person in your organization? And what tends to happen in community and voluntary organizations, in many cases, is that it's someone who once showed an interest in computers, once showed an interest in how things work, and then they suddenly become the IT person with all the passwords and all the details. I would say that probably will be quite familiar to many of you. What else do we have? Well, the outward-facing nature of charities and a culture of trust. Trustworthy, trusting, nice people in many cases, doing things to help other people, and that makes you particularly vulnerable to criminality. It's the case that you're working in sectors where there are people who need your help, and you're willing to give that help very, very quickly. Unfortunately, it turns out that the cyber criminals are out to try to cause problems for you. So what do we have? Well, this is from a document, the Governance Jigsaw, which hopefully will be something that you will have seen. Before. So where in the Governance Jigsaw does cybersecurity fit in? Well, cybersecurity fits in a number of different areas here. So hopefully you can see that. It says you need to be aware of other laws that apply to your charity. Okay, so that can be about for instance, the GDPR, the 4 letters that terrify most people, but which are absolutely vital for running a successful organization. What other sections does cybersecurity fit into on here? Well, managing risks, protecting assets, reputations, and people. For me, is a direct cybersecurity point. So you need to think about what your assets are. You need to think about how you're protecting those assets, and you need to be putting in plans as much as you can for managing the risks to those assets. What else do we have? Well, having and following appropriate controls and procedures. We're going to talk about that in a second in a bit more detail. Appropriate controls and procedures. What does that actually mean for you? Well, what it means is that you're meant to have processes and procedures in place for managing your organization, which you all will have in many, many cases. But what we have to also do is we have to think about how cybersecurity fits into that. And the final section on this is that being prepared in case something goes wrong. So we all probably have seen examples of when cybersecurity or when cyber issues have gone wrong, or someone's website gets compromised, or some mistake happens and someone's email address gets compromised, and then an invoice is raised. We work with lots of organizations of varying sizes, and one of the things we saw quite recently was that an organization had their email compromised, and an invoice sent out to somebody fraudulently with the bank details changed. Now, the company in question paid the invoice to the number that was on the invoice, the bank account that was on the invoice, but that means that somebody somewhere is losing out. Okay, and especially in the cases of poorly funded organisations like yourselves, it can really make a massive difference to the turnover at the end of the year. So just some findings again, and this is just to recap around some of the things that we saw before. So UK charities hold useful information. The type and amount of information held varies, but charities are subject to the same vulnerabilities as other organisations and businesses that conduct financial transactions, but don't sometimes have the money. A very small sample of charities were questioned for a government commissioned report. I mean, the fact that 30 charities were questioned leads me to think that there needs to be more focus on this. But out of the 30 charities, everyone had experienced cyber breaches in some way, shape or form, including viruses, phishing emails, ransomware attacks, identity theft, website takedowns, and variants of online financial fraud. Okay, so everyone had experienced issues. The breaches resulted in loss of funds, data, and website control, and it really does suggest that things are a problem at the moment. Okay, so what else are we seeing here? Well, this is a cybersecurity guide that has come from the lovely people at the National Cybersecurity People. And this is a very useful document to be aware of, and is definitely something to kind of consider. Okay, so what do we have here? Well, it's all of the sort of things that we preach about all the time. If we were talking face to face, I would say that it's time to that you should kind of adopt the mantra of a backup isn't a backup until it's tested. Okay, we'll maybe talk about that in a little bit more detail slightly later on. Okay, so I think that's really important to be aware of. So let's talk about home working. Okay, home working is something that has been a kind of thrust upon us, as it were. So we've seen this kind of come in over the course of the last wee while. It's definitely something that we're not as comfortable with as some people are. So what are we doing? How are we working from home? Well, we're all working remotely. We're working in a very different way. Let me just check my screen share here, because I'm just going to refer to a different slideshow here. This one, I believe it is now. So let's think about remote working. Okay. So sorry, let me just scroll through. So where are we now? Well, we're in this environment here. I've got my fake office behind me, but what we're starting to see now is that that everyone is out of the offices. We're seeing some change on that now in England. We're Northern Ireland and the Republic and Scotland and Wales is all slightly different at the moment. But we're seeing 100% remote or virtual working. We're expected to maintain business as usual wherever possible, and we are also being pulled apart by our different requirements here. So, for instance, maybe I would ask a poll to say how many of you are homeschooling on kind of company laptops or organizational laptops. Those two are very poor bedfellows, as it were. The idea that you're watching, that you're doing Netflix or you're doing your home working or your homeschooling, sorry, on the same device that you're doing your bank transfers on, does potentially lead to potential issues. So what can we do? Well, advice from the experts. There is some fantastic advice here, and I'm going to make these slides available afterwards, so you'll be able to see them. There is some fantastic advice here for working remotely, and I'm just going to kind of digest that advice down for you here. But there's some really, really good stuff. So if you're working from home, how can you do this more securely? Okay, so first things first. You're probably using Google Suite or Office 365 or something like that. If you are, then Set good passwords. That's one of the key things that you can do. At this point, before I've asked Stephen what his password policy is for NICVA, and I seem to remember, I think it's something like 20 characters minimum is the password policy, and that's been in effect from before the COVID crisis. You need to make sure that your passwords are strong enough not to get not to be reused in other places, and that they are that they're decent passwords. How do we do that? Well, you can use a few different ways of doing it. There is the idea of creating a passphrase, which is 3 or 4 different words all joined together. So we could use those sort of things, and all of that is very, very useful to keep in mind. So looking around my room, if I needed to set a password now, I might set it as door handle fireplace stapler, for instance, and that's a reasonably good passphrase for something that I have to remember. Okay. What else can we do? Well, use two-factor authentication. Anyone who uses Google Suite or Office 365 should be trying to use two-factor authentication wherever possible. It really will save yourselves when and if something goes wrong. So try wherever possible to use two-factor authentication. And also, very important point, think about your admin users. So you might be the IT person in your organization, which means you probably have access to Office 365 administrator, to your Google Suite administrator, things like that. If you've got access to those, then please be more aware. Okay, you have to think that through. When's the last time you revisited your password on those systems? Is it something that you are confident with? If it's not, then please leave this webinar after this afternoon and go away and change your password or reset it to something decent. Okay, passwords will solve a lot of your problem. Okay, it's an absolutely vital thing to be doing. So strong and long passwords, two-factor wherever possible, and think about your admin users especially. What else do we have? Well, we've got confused users. If I did a poll right now to ask you how many of you are confused at the moment, we look at the results of the poll there, 17% were not prepared at all, we're struggling. What do we need to do? Well, we need to make life easier for users, for the people who are going to be working with us and for us during this time frame. So what can we do? Well, we can write everything down. What's our process for instance, paying an invoice remotely? So if we receive an invoice in, what do we need to do? Well, we need to consider who sent us that, don't we? We need to kind of consider who sent us that, who approves that. So when an invoice comes into our company, for instance, it's put into a holding pattern. It's approved by a couple of different people, by myself and my business partner, and then it's paid. But what we don't do is we don't accept change of invoice, bank account details on invoices over email. We always phone up and verify that the person is who they say they are, all those sort of things. We write those down and we specify this is how we will do this. That's a good idea for you as well. What about how to install remote software? How to access Office 365? How to access your Google Suite? What do you do to do that? Write it all down for your users and it will make life a lot less complex for them. And that's a really useful tip, really important thing to take away with you is write it all down for your users. Okay, so make your software easily accessible. So do we want our remote users to be writing down, looking for a copy of Microsoft Office on some dodgy site on the dark web so that they get it for free? Or do we want to be making it easily accessible to them so that they can just download it and use it on their environments? Now, in the charity and community and voluntary sector, there are various sites that you can use to get very vastly reduced Office applications, antivirus, things like that. I'm sure Stephen and Sandra will share the details of those at the end. But what it allows you to do is to get vastly reduced cost for the software. So think about that. Think about how to make it easy for your users to get the right software. Writing your how-to guides, and think about the hardware that they should use. So is it worthwhile, for instance, for maybe your accounts person, if you have the money, if you have the capability, buy them a laptop that is purely for work, okay? If you're able to do so, it would be a very good thing. And then they can use their personal laptop or personal iPad or personal other devices for all the other bits and pieces that come along with this, with what we're seeing at the moment. Also, the brilliant Microsoft technical support calls that we probably are all starting to hear a bit more about. I know that because I'm at home now, I'm close to my home phone, just outside in the corridor there, and in the home phone I get lots and lots of people trying to help support my Microsoft account that doesn't exist. Okay, so what do we need to do? Well, you need to kind of consider how you helping how your users deal with those. So if they receive a call, what should they do? Should they try and get the number and report it to Scamwise NI? Should they look at should they just hang up straight away? Or, what should they do? Think these things through. Personally, my advice is just to hang up straight away if you hear any of these things. Because firstly, I was on with one a wee while back and he got rather offensive with me. But secondly, they're very good at talking their way into situations. Okay, what else can we do? Don't leave the doors unlocked. Okay, I think that's a really important thing. So secure your cloud. And I know that sounds really, that's the sort of thing some techie Egypt's going to say, but I'm going to say it instead. So secure your cloud. What do I mean by that? Well, precisely what I was talking about before. Office 365 is the key to your organization. And if I have time, I'm going to talk about business email compromise in a short while. Okay, so don't. So what you've got to try to do is to secure that environment, and you do that by having decent passwords. You do that by having your two-factor authentication in place, and you make sure that you've got everything sorted out. What about securing your office? This still counts. This still matters. Okay, so I know some organizations who use remote desktop, for instance, to access their machines in the office. But what does that mean? Well, it means they have to leave. Essentially, they have to leave a port open, and a port basically is like a little window that is maybe open a crack at the back of the office for somebody to get into. But you've got to remember that it won't just be the nice people who are trying to get in. It's going to be the bad people as well. Okay, so think about how you get into your office. Speak to your IT providers about something called a VPN. Can they set up a VPN for you and your clients? If you have the capability to do it, it will help to save problems. So think about your cloud. Secure your cloud. Think about how you protect it. Devices. Again, this is a massive problem because we all have children to entertain, or as many of us will have children to entertain, and they need to do Roblox, or they need to do various other bits and pieces. These are all very important things. So what do we do? Do we allow them to use their own devices now? If we do allow them to use their own devices, then how do we secure the data on them? Okay, so if we're going to allow a user to use their own devices, then we have to be aware of the fact that they may be storing personal data about our users or our clients on their now personal system. Do we understand what encryption is in place on those systems? Do we understand how we might remotely wipe those devices if they were compromised? What about the loss of the control of the data? So they're suddenly on somebody's machine over which we have no control. So how do we prevent that? And lastly, anti-malware. So if a machine is in our office, we're looking after it, then we have full control over how that works, and the malware the anti-malware software that might be in place. Do you have a paid-for antivirus product? If you don't, then I would thoroughly recommend going out and getting them. I'm not a salesman, by the way. I'm not going to flog you any antivirus software. That's not what I do. I would encourage you to have a look at some of them and make sure that you're getting a decent paid-for antivirus product. The free ones are all well and good, but it is definitely worth paying for good AV. So think about the data when you're about where it's being stored, because what we don't want is suddenly to be presented with lots of issues because somebody does a subject access request, for instance, and you actually find data on someone's personal machine. Free Wi-Fi usage is less of an issue at the moment because none of us are in coffee shops, but that can be something to consider. What about USB drives? What about backups at the moment? How are we doing backups over this time? So if you're working from home, you're working remotely, how are you backing up the work that you're doing? These are things that you need to take with you and need to be doing. Okay, so if you don't have any backups in place, then that's definitely something to consider. Okay, so you need to be making sure that they're there. And software updates similarly. So just if your team are using their own devices, then what do you need to make sure of? Well, you need to make sure of the fact that they're doing their software updates, because you don't have control over their devices anymore. And why do we have to do that? Well, it's because the scamming doesn't stop. Okay, excuse me, sorry. I took this from a post from the PSNI about current scams that are in place. When we're all allowed to meet together, I have shared some examples of scam emails, of phishing emails, and this is a good example of one. So this is an email that was received by ourselves, and in here you can see that if you want more advice about COVID and coronavirus, then all you have to do is to click that little link at the bottom there. And what does that link at the bottom do? Well, nothing good. Okay, so the scamming hasn't stopped. In fact, in some ways it's increased. Look at this, an email from the World Health Organization to the PSNI directly talking about compromise of their systems. So, you know, that's an example of where the scamming just keeps on going. And the gov.uk link here as well is really useful to be aware of. But this is not a legitimate email. This is an email that looks pretty good, but it's giving you a taxable refund of £128.34. And all you need to do is to provide them with your bank details. That's all you need to do. But obviously it's a scam. Okay, so being aware of all of those is the most important thing. So what can we do? Well, we always recommend that let me go back. Well, I was lucky enough a couple of years ago to go on a cybersecurity exchange visit to the US. I got to go to the FBI headquarters, to the Department of Homeland Security, a few other government organizations over in the States, and I got to see how they were doing things. And one of the questions I asked in every department I went to was, what's the one thing you would change? Okay, and I asked the FBI, the Department of Defense, and the Department of Homeland Security. And the number one response from each of them, with slightly varying numbers, was, so what's the one thing that would help solve your problems? And they said, if we could stop users clicking on links, it would solve between 85 and 95% of our problems. So that's a really important thing. So if they're having problems with that, they're supposed to know what they're doing. Okay, so you know, that's a really important thing to be thinking about. Okay, and how can you do that? Well, it turns out that there's free training. The NCSC provides some fantastic training for you. The National Cybersecurity Centre encourage you to go on and do this training. They've worked really hard at it. There's some fantastic cybersecurity training available online for free at the moment. Okay, it lasts about half an hour and it gives you a good overview of what problems you might face. In our organization, for instance, it's one of the induction sections. Okay, so when you join our company, one of the first things you do is you get given an email address and access to the internet and all that sort of stuff. And the next thing you're asked to do is to do a cybersecurity video. Okay, and we're a cybersecurity company, so hopefully we're hiring people who are aware of these things. But this is really important to us. Okay, so this is a very, very important thing. And as we can see there, there are some guidelines here, some really useful bits and pieces here about staying safe online. I'm going to provide a link to that as well, which is all about some top tips. Okay, so what do they mention there? It's all the things I've mentioned here: defending against phishing attacks, using strong passwords, securing your devices, and I like this phrase here: if in doubt, call it out. So if you see an invoice come in that doesn't look right, what do you do? Okay. just around the phishing attacks thing as well, there is a new service from the NCSC, the National Cybersecurity Centre, which allows you to report phishing emails. Okay, and they've had a huge amount of success with users submitting emails to them. And all you need to do is you need to send an email to a particular email address, forward the scam email on to a particular email address, and they will sort it out. Okay, they will investigate it and they will see what they can do to solve the problem. Okay, so and we'll put that in the pack at the end. So I'm going to just go back to my other presentation now here, if I may. Hold on. Where am I? There we go. So what I wanted to kind of just go over a little bit and cover was around passwords again. Okay, so I want to leave you with a few tips about passwords and an explanation of why passwords are so important. So what I ask you to do when we're all together is to do a bit of a password responsibility exercise here. Okay, so this here is an exercise that we suggest people look at. So thinking about the passwords that you use on a regular basis. My apologies. Thinking about the passwords that you use on a regular basis, identify where you're using the same password in multiple places. Okay, so identify where you're using the same password in multiple places. And the purpose of this exercise is to get you to think about the fact that you shouldn't be. Okay, so if your email address gets and password gets compromised for one system, if it's the same on 10 different systems, then that causes you a lot of hassle. If it's compromised on one system and it stays on that one system, then that's an awful lot better. So let's think about that, okay? And I'd like you to kind of consider that exercise. There's a website which you may well have come across called Have I Been Pwned, which presents us with some information about whether our email addresses have been listed in breaches or not. So in this one, we can see that my current email address, we're all good. It's great to see. Thanks. I'm happy with that. But an email address I used relatively recent, up until maybe a year and a half ago, is listed on 7 breached sites. So it's just my first name at verticalstructure.com instead of first.last at verticalstructure.com. Go on this site and investigate and see if your, investigate and see if your email address is listed on there. Okay, have a look through and see what you can see. It will probably surprise you. If you are listed on that site, my suggestion would be to change your password as quickly as you possibly can. Okay. What else about passwords? Well, I've already mentioned how important it is. Well, the passwords, with a password, what you've got to make sure of is that you're not making life more difficult for your users. Okay. So in this case, what have we got? Well, the UK government advice is that users are generally told to remember passwords, not to share them, reuse them, or write them down. But we all have hundreds of passwords. If I was to show you my password manager that I use, I have probably 500-600 passwords, each for different things. And I use a password manager to handle those. So I'm going to just touch on that very briefly at the end here. So what we're saying here, what the UK government say here, is that regular password changing harms rather than improves security. So don't ask your users to change their password every 30 days. It doesn't make it more secure. It doesn't make it better. Ask them to use a complex password instead. Okay, so ask them to use a decent password instead of asking them to change it every 30 days. What I wanted to also show you is the availability of passwords. Okay, so, oh, sorry, my slides have gone on a bit there. Passwords are all available to lots of people all the time. We have access to some of these systems here, which show us, they give us the top 10 million passwords that have been compromised. That's the top 10 million. You know, so that's a useful set of data for all of us, especially in my line of work. And you can see what some of those passwords are there. What else do we see? Well, we see things like this. Okay, so has anyone, I hope no one does have their password written underneath their mouse. The person at the top up here has taken the don't change your passwords to a pretty extreme level by putting writing it in indelible ink. And here we see a post-it note full of passwords. I wouldn't be surprised if somebody doesn't have that in our in the attendee list today. And finally, just thinking about these passwords again, I just mentioned about choosing a three-word password. This is actually one of the reasons why that's a good suggestion. If we have a look at this XKCD cartoon, which I really love, this here kind of tells us why that might be useful. So we see here we've got Troubadour &3, which is a password. It uses numerals, it uses punctuation, substitutions between letters and numbers, that sort of thing. And according to this estimation, that's approximately 28 bits of entropy, which would take, what does it say, 3 days at 1,000 guesses per second. Okay, so it takes 3 days to guess that. It's hard to remember. It's easy for a computer to guess a bad password, essentially. What about this? Well, this guy posits that that by using this phrase, these 4 random words, correct horse battery staple, for instance, that generates a larger amount of entropy. Which then allows us to understand that at the same amount of guesses per second, it would take 550 years. Now, there are questions around that. We can just use a dictionary. We can do, it's not 100%, but it is better than nothing. And I would strongly recommend looking at that as a way of securing your systems. I also spoke there briefly about password managers, and some of the password managers that are in use are things like LastPass, 1Password, Dashlane, KeePass. There are all manner of things out there. My business partner uses LastPass. I use KeePass, which is a local one. There are some other people I know who love Dashlane. Dashlane is very much more corporate, quite expensive, but very, very powerful. So they all are good in their own ways. If you want something that will integrate very easily with your systems, then I quite like LastPass. I think that's very good. Again, I'm not a reseller, so it's not like I'm flogging stuff at you. But LastPass, I believe, offers a free tier, which allows you to do various bits and pieces. So LastPass is a really good option for password usage. I'm going to finish up in just a couple of minutes here, but what I wanted to talk about was just around multi-factor authentication. So firstly, I've spoken about multi-factor auth. It's a really useful thing to be aware of, but why? Well, we've already seen how usernames and passwords are shared in between different users. We've already seen how usernames and passwords, we use the same thing on different accounts, on different systems, on different web applications. That's fine. Okay, so if that gets compromised and you've used the same password on 10 different systems, then potentially you're in a whole world of trouble. But what about if you have something like this? You have two-factor authentication. You get a text message potentially from a user, from a system before you're able to log on to your accounting package, so Sage or Xero or something like that. You use Google Authenticator and get a 6-digit code whenever you log onto the system. That's a much better way of doing things. So take a look at multi-factor authentication. There's a myriad of resources about how to enable two-factor auth, and it really will save yourself from a lot of hassle. Finally, my message to you is once again about your users. So listen to your users. So if your user Amy, for instance, has all of her passwords written on a post-it note under her keyboard, then that's not Amy trying to circumvent your rules and regulations. That's not Amy trying to make it easier for somebody to break in and attack your systems. That's Amy saying to you, I have too many passwords and I don't know how to store them. So what's the solution? Password manager, helping her to use authentication in a different way. It's all about listening to your users. Brian keeps backups of important data on a personal pen drive. Well, again, that's not Brian doing that out of badness. Brian's doing that probably because he wants to make sure that he doesn't lose his data should something bad happen. He may have experienced something like that before, where the systems all died and you didn't have access to the to backups, which means that he lost his work. So What can we do in that situation? Well, we can help the users with their backup issues, and we can prove to them that our backups are working. What about this one? Claire lets David use her account just for 5 minutes while she went to make a cup of tea. Again, we need to have some element of trust within our organizations, but we've got to be cautious as well, okay? So it's really important that we're starting to be very careful with these things. So thinking again, flipping back to the processes that we were talking about before. And think about the fact that people break the rules because they need to get the job done. So people don't do this deliberately. They're doing this, and they don't do it maliciously. They do it because they need to get the job done, okay? I will, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be sending these slides out, obviously. There was just looking here, there were two things I wanted to, one thing I wanted to bring up. Cybersecurity insurance, cyber insurance are things that we get asked about quite a lot, especially at the moment when things are so different. Cyber insurance is a useful thing to have. It is definitely something to investigate. If you are working towards what's known as the Cyber Essentials scheme, then if you complete the Cyber Essentials scheme and you are certified to that, then actually you get £25,000 worth of free cyber cover with that scheme. So it's definitely worth investigating that. And Cyber Essentials will help you to understand how secure you actually are. So think about cyber insurance. It can help save the day when things go horribly wrong. So if I could leave you with three things, okay, and I'm going to do so, before I answer the question, sorry, I would like to leave you with these 3 points here. So passwords, get a password manager and use two-factor authentication, okay? Those two things will save pretty much everything. Malware, I mentioned it earlier, get a good antivirus. It's definitely a good thing. And finally, train your users. NCSC training and Cyber Essentials are useful things to be aware of, and they will help you to be aware of issues that will come your way. Okay, so with that in mind, I'm going to flip to the questions tab there, and we've got a couple of questions here. If you do have any more questions, please put them into the question box while I'm talking, and I will try very hard to answer them as I go through here. So there's a question here from William. Thanks very much, William, for asking the questions. Are there particular security issues when using a VPN to work from home? So in my view, there are two different sorts of VPNs that you could be using. Okay, a VPN which we'll call it a corporate VPN, but maybe organization VPN is the better way to describe it. And that's one which connects you directly into your office or into your systems, and then from there you can go out and do whatever you need to do. Okay, so that's one sort of VPN that is organizational. So it's all for you to securely connect you from home to the office to allow you to access resources you wouldn't necessarily be able to access. Then there are the other sorts. There's things like NordVPN or the TunnelBear and things like that. And they're public VPNs essentially. So what all that does is that kind of hides where your IP address is coming from, where your connection is coming from, essentially. From my point of view, I don't think that adds a particular level of security for your for you as a user. I think that what that sort of VPN does is actually to kind of, in some ways, to reduce your security. It can be useful to have something like that in place if you're traveling and you're working from a coffee shop, for instance. But for pure working from home, that having NordVPN or one of those systems, I don't think is a particularly useful increase for security. If you're using the organization VPN, that will definitely help you, because all of your traffic will then go through the organization, go through the company. So William, I hope that's answered your question. If not, please feel free to put it in the chat. I can't see anything popping up in there, but what I do have is another question here from Sarah McCracken. Thank you so much, Sarah, for coming along and for asking a question. Can I advise on how backups can be done for an organization remotely? And can we rely on Office 365 through this time as we're unable to be in the office? So it's a very wide-reaching question, okay? So it's a very, unfortunately, I can't give you a black and white answer. What I can say is that Office 365 has some fantastic tools available to it. How it's implemented is dependent on you or your provider. They offer a tool called OneDrive, which is very like Dropbox or those sort of things. And what that allows you to do is to synchronize your files from your computer up to Office, up to OneDrive. And that can be very, very useful because it means that if your machine was to die, then at least you could access the files remotely as well. Okay, so that's a useful thing to have in place. OneDrive for Business, I think, is available with most of the packages, and that can really help sort things out. But what that doesn't really do is to solve a long-term backup problem. So if I put this scenario to you, and you can, I put this scenario to people a lot of the time and ask them to respond, but unfortunately can't in this case. But the scenario would be, say, for instance, you have a document that you've been working on, let's say Belfast City Council form, that funding form, which is submitted in December. Somebody comes along by accident and deletes it from your file share in January, and it's now May. How would you access that document? And the answer in many cases is we couldn't, because the backup time frame for Office 365 by default, I believe, is 30 days, something like that. So does that work therefore as a backup system? The answer is probably not. Okay, so what you've got to be thinking about is how could we restore our systems if things were to go wrong? Could you maybe buy a company specific USB device that then uses a reasonable level of encryption on your desktop to back things up to, or do you rely on the Office 365 or the Google Suite stuff and just make sure that your retention period is increased, which you do from inside the Office 365 administrator? What would you do? So think about that fact that if something were to be deleted in January and it's now May, how would I get that back? That's always a question I would ask your IT provider. Are there any other questions that have come in? Sandra or Stephen, have you had any more questions come in? I had a couple of there, but if not, I would like to thank everybody for coming along. Thanks to NICVA for sorting this out. The recording of this will be available afterwards, and the slides will be available also. So we'll get them out to you. Apart from that, I would just like to say thanks again. And I will maybe pass over to Stephen. Stephen, I'll just unmute you there. And if there's anything else for anyone else to ask, then please feel free to put it into the questions or chat room. I'll hang around for a wee minute.
Hi, Simon. Thanks very much for that. That was really helpful. I guess we are in difficult times, different operating processes for many people. I'd probably like to come back to see how organizations are adapting to this operating environment. So we'll maybe come out to people again and ask them how they're finding it and what their key issues are. So I think we're scheduled to go on here until 1:30, but if anyone has any particular follow-ups in terms of that, about how you're adapting, maybe with a couple of minutes before we go, if anyone has any particular questions they want to have a final go at that before we wrap up. I can't actually see the question panel here, Simon. I'm not sure where they're getting logged to.
Yes, I can see them here. So I've just got a question here from Kerry as well, which thanks for that, Kerry. So we're working from home at the moment and using Skype for business and Teams for video calling, but they can be unstable over the various strengths of broadband staff have in their home. We've used Zoom, which is great and really stable, but heard it can be insecure and now have a Zoom bombing term. There are a myriad of questions about these things, and actually that's a very good point, and thanks, Kerry, for putting that into for raising that with us, because I had meant to answer this. I find that video conferencing systems, there's so many out there now, and they all depend on on a couple of different bits and pieces. First things first is broadband connection. If your broadband connection is not good, then none of them will be any good, really, to be blatant. So if your broadband connection is rubbish, then it's not going to improve really by using a different platform. So what you really need to make sure of is, Ofcom issued some advice at the beginning of all of this, and there were some really basic bits and pieces in there, but very, very helpful bits and pieces. So, for instance, don't be on a video call if you're having problems. Don't be on a video call at the same time as your children are watching 5 different Netflix videos, and also playing Roblox with their mates, and you're streaming something or downloading something on your phone or anything like that. So if you need to be on a video call, then try and prioritize that. Okay, so in my case, I push the kids outside and ask them to go and play on the trampoline, or just get out more at some points. So if you're able to do that, that can be very useful. When it comes to security, so one of the things, what I would say is that Zoom has had some issues in the past. It has been less focused on security and more on usability over the last wee while. That is now changing greatly. There was a new release of Zoom actually yesterday or day before, I can't remember, where there's some really good stuff has been added to it. Zoom is getting there. It is a good place to, it's a reasonable place to start. What I would always suggest, though, is that you need to think about the security of what you're looking at. So I don't necessarily agree with the fact that that there should have been a cabinet meeting held on Zoom a couple of weeks ago. I don't necessarily think that's a good idea, but I was in a family quiz on Friday night, and we used Zoom for that because it's all just eating about and playing, having quizzes and bingo and all that sort of stuff. So Zoom was a really good option for us to do that. So think about the data that you're sharing. If what you're working on is, for instance, a piece about people who've suffering from a particular mental health crisis, and it's very sensitive data, then maybe don't do that on a platform that you're unsure about. It's very difficult to go wrong with something like Teams if it's already built into your package. So I would probably suggest that if you're talking about sensitive material, then Teams is a really good one to go with. But don't be afraid of using Zoom and things like that as well. So just consider the material that you're sharing and consider the implications of it. If you have an IT company or if you have an IT provider, then ask them as well, because they will have certain measures that they can put in place to help secure things as well. So think about that. Ask your IT people. And just while I'm on the topic, we do use GoToMeeting. My company uses GoToMeeting as our video conferencing system of choice. I find it very useful and easy to use, and I think it's quite good. So I would probably suggest I would definitely say have a look at it at least. Okay. So unless there are any more questions, I think that will probably do us. So firstly, thank you very much to everybody for coming along. Stephen, do you have any other bits of housekeeping you want to add, or are you all good?
No, I think that's been really good. Yeah. Oh, Sandra, yeah.
Yes, sorry, Stephen and Simon. Is it okay if I come in just for a second?
Please do.
Just to say to everybody, as Simon and Stephen have said, when we are doing a series of different webinars, obviously over the next wee while, and we would love to hear from you as to other topics and areas that you're interested in. Please go to our website to see other ones that are available. We've scheduled up until the end of May, beginning of June, but we are looking to plan more for June. So please do get in touch with us to let us know what you're in need of and what you're interested in. Thank you. Thanks very much, Simon, for that. That was really helpful.
Brilliant. That's great stuff then. Thanks very much. And as I say, we'll make the recording available as soon as we can. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Simon. Bye.